Hey guys, this is Gekko the Geico, and today we're going to be talking about the basics of shorting and how this is another way to make money in the stock market. Alright, so there are many ways to make money in the stock market. Two popular ones is buying stocks, and the other is shorting. Now, someone who buys stocks makes money only when the stock price goes up. So they try to buy a stock at their low price and hope to sell that stock at a higher price. As you can see from the picture above, buy low and sell high is fundamental. So for a buyer, profit goes up when the stock price goes up. But when the stock price goes down, the buyer loses money. But for shorting, it's completely opposite. A short seller makes money when the stock price goes down. So ultimately, what the short seller wants to do is sell high and buy low, opposite to what a buyer does. But how can you sell something you never bought and don't technically own? Well, as a short seller, you don't own the shares you're selling. You're borrowing shares and then selling them. If you look at the picture above, the short seller is supposed to borrow on the high and sell it immediately. And then if the stock price drops, the short seller buys back low. So a short seller is betting that the stock will go down, and if it does, they make money. Now let's take a deeper look into the actual shorting process. Step number 1, a short seller makes a bet that a company's stock price will decrease. Step number 2, that short seller borrows shares from an existing shareholder of the company that the short seller wants to short. Step number 3, once the short seller receives the borrowed shares, they will sell it off immediately at the current price and pocket whatever those borrowed shares are worth. Step number 4, if the short seller's bet works out, comes to fruition, and the stock price drops, the short seller will buy back in at the decreased price. Which leads to step number 5. So once the short seller buys back in at that lowered price, the short seller will be able to return the borrowed shares back to the lending shareholder, right? And how does the short seller make money? Well, that comes in step number 6. So remember, the short seller pocketed the sale, right? So the worth of those original borrowed shares are in the short seller's pocket. Now have the pocketed sale minus the buyback price, and that would equal the short seller profit. Now here's something more visual. Let's go through this example. So we have company A stock price, and we're looking at day 1 through day 5, right? And we have a short seller who has borrowed 1 share of company A stock on day 1. It's worth $100, and he is predicting its fall on day 5. So he's making a bet that company A stock price will devalue over the 5-day period. Now the short seller sells that 1 share on same day 1 and pockets $100. Now on day 5, company A stock has dropped to $20, and now the short seller buys back in. So his bet was correct. So once he buys back in at $20, the short seller returns that borrowed share to whomever he borrowed from. So the short seller has now pocketed $100, but he still paid $20 for that borrowed share that he returned. So we take the difference, and the short seller has an overall profit of $80. So let's take a look at some of the examples of when shorting worked out well for investors and some times where it didn't really work out. First up, we have the 2008 financial crisis. Only a few investors were able to catch on to the signals of an economic crash in 2008, one of those investors being the legendary Michael Burry. Now, this investor was able to predict the 2008 financial crisis and took on big short positions that ended up being worth billions upon billions of dollars. And if you guys want to learn more about Michael Burry and other investors that shorted the market in 2008, you guys should definitely watch The Big Short, which is a movie about the 2008 crash and the short sellers who benefited from it. So 2008 crisis was basically big shorting success stories for the short sellers who got in before the crash. Now, our second example is in 2012, where billionaire hedge fund manager and famous active investor Bill Ackman took on a $1 billion short position on Herbalife. However, he had a pretty fierce and upset enemy, competitor, Carl Icahn, who was an even bigger billionaire. And Icahn decided to buy up Herbalife stock, which dramatically increased Herbalife stock price, resulting in Bill Ackman's eventual loss of almost $1 billion. So this was a pretty tragic story for Ackman, of course, where shorting didn't work out so well. But let's not forget a famous example, and I'm talking about the GME short squeeze, right? So GME is GameStop, and for those who don't know, GameStop was basically a failing company. And hedge funds were taking advantage of their failing financials and shorted the GME stock repeatedly. Now, retail investors saw this and felt like it was a little unfair that hedge funds were bullying small stocks like GME and shorting them constantly. So retail investors did a mass buying spree of GME stock, which resulted in a 800% year-to-date stock price gain. So it's a pretty incredible story for GME and a very devastating one for the shorting hedge funds. Now, what's the relationship between short seller, broker, and the lending shareholder? Because when you short a stock, who does that go through to? And who is really lending out those shares to you for you to short? Well, this is a process called the process of hypothecation in short selling. And hypothecation is basically the permission for your broker to lend out your shares, your securities. So the first step in this process starts with the short seller. The short seller places a short order to borrow shares of a company so that they can short that company. Now the broker processes that order and takes shares from its random shareholder accounts, but they assume all benefits and risks. However, the random shareholder who is lending out shares of that specific company is oblivious and is shown only the standard status on their positions. So it's pretty mischievous, but an interesting relationship between the short seller, broker, and shareholder. In conclusion, shorting is another way to make money in the stock market, except it's absolutely different from and opposite from when you're buying stocks, because like I said before, shorting is making money when a stock goes down. And that only works when you borrow shares from an existing shareholder. Now, short selling is risky because a short seller is taking a bet on the stock falling. And if the bet doesn't work out, the short seller could get short squeezed, like Bill Ackman. Now, short squeezing means that when a stock goes up against your short position. Now, in the process of a short selling order, the broker borrows shares from other existing shareholder accounts and lends them out to short sellers, assumes all benefit and risk. Well, this is the end of this Shorting 101 EDU-Series. There are more to come, but thank you guys for watching. And as I like to say, just 15 minutes with SKAITUBE can save you 15% or more on your losses. That is the Gekko, the Geico guarantee.